Hey guys, it's interesting. Everybody's on this side of the room, so I'll be leaning this direction. So we'll see whoever else comes in. Guys, thanks for being here. It's a pleasure to talk to you guys. Social Security is such an exciting topic. I can see the excitement on your faces. It's just part of life. We all work to get to retirement, and we have set goals to try to accomplish whatever we choose to accomplish, but at the very end, we expect that Social Security is going to be a part of that. So we find that this topic is clearly of great interest to everyone. There are a lot of misconceptions about Social Security. There are a lot of there's different information out there, and very few people have a great grasp on it, largely because it's a government program. Does anybody understand many government programs? I mean, take a look at the literature that we've given you. Now, I will also tell you, on par with what we would expect from our government, which I do love our country, but our government is a little slow. This is 2014. This is the latest. Last time I checked, it was 2015. The 2015 updates have not come out yet. But there have not been substantial changes to Social Security. But there's always changes in the tax code. So as we kind of go through the presentation, understand things do change. And what we talk about today may not be absolutely factual. A year from now or 2 years from now, there'll be adjustments. Typically, it's inflation adjustments to different numbers and different factors, and we'll kind of cover that. So kind of the purpose of this presentation, by the way, there's a disclosure. Everybody got that? Good. We want to review the value of your Social Security. What is Social Security all about? I want to talk about the rules of the road for receiving Social Security. We all know what it is basically, but we'll cover some of the details about that. Possible routes to maximize your benefits. So as we meet with our members and our clients, we want to talk about how do you best take advantage of what's available to you. Social Security is not, by the way, a freebie. You contributed. You've been contributing as long as you've been working. So it's not a giveaway, it's not a subsidy, it's not a handout from the government. It is our money that we've put into this system, and we are getting a payback for that. And we'll talk about kind of the history of Social Security. The future of Social Security, when we have these presentations and discussions, we always get questions about, well, what is the future of Social Security? Does anybody in here have any concerns about the solvency of Social Security? Few of us. The younger you are, the greater your concern should be. For those of us that have aged past the age of 50, closer to the age of 60, and past the age of 60, probably have fewer concerns, but we should have concerns because there are some real issues with the Social Security system. Retirement income planning, we'll talk about that we do for our members and clients, and we'll review. Okay, if you didn't know, a little historical information. Social Security was created in 1935. Anybody in here alive in 1935? I don't think so. Okay. But we have parents and grandparents that were alive in 1935. We know what was happening in the country. Those of you that are history buffs, what was happening in 1935? What was going on? The country was going through the Great Depression. A terrible economic period in the country. Lots of turmoil, lots of economic issues, a lot of depression. People were starving, okay? And there became a great concern about, well, we've got elderly folks, and by the way, elderly in 1935 had a little different connotation than it does today. Elderly in 1935, 60 years old, 65, holy cow, that's old. What do we think of as elderly today? What's that?
There's a new 30.
90. 95. Okay, you're getting a little elderly then, right? Do we think of 65 as elderly? I hope not, because I'm getting close, right? So things have changed, and that has a great impact on what's happened with Social Security and why we have some of the concerns we have. Longevity. How long are people living? Back in 1935, people weren't living so long. Then you add to it the Great Depression and the fact that people were literally starving and had challenges. So, Social Security was designed to alleviate the problems of poverty for seniors. Okay? So it was a program developed to help people survive. Now we fast forward to today. We look at typical retirement income. The typical retiree today, their income sources are what you see on the screen. 38% of the typical retiree's income is Social Security. That may surprise you. You may know people, anybody in here know anyone that's living 100% on Social Security? And is that a very comfortable, luxurious lifestyle? It's not. It's sustaining, hopefully, depending on your situation. It's tough to make it 100% on Social Security. So the average retirees, when we have to combine a couple different things here. How many of you see people when you go to work or when you're out in your daily affairs and you go to a restaurant or you go to a store or you go to wherever you go, do you see people over the age of 65 working? A lot. Now we got the classic greeter at Walmart example, but really we are seeing a greater percentage of our population over the age of 65 working. And why is that? Because they have to. Because Social Security isn't enough. Now, there are a great number of us that want to continue working after 65. Again, as we talk about the evolution or change of aging and what's happened in our society and our population, 65 is the new 55, 45, 35, whatever. So, at 65, you're healthy and you feel good and you don't want to sit around and watch, Price is Right all day long. Yeah, you want to get out there and do things, and that's wonderful. But there's a large percentage of the population that has to get out and work because Social Security isn't enough. And maybe we didn't do enough planning. The other, pensions, I'm trying to remember the institution here. You don't have a pension, do you? But you may have a pension from a former employment. The pensions were much more common with our parents and our grandparents. Pensions were the original 401k. Back in the 50s, there wasn't a 401k. It didn't exist. AT&T and all the other big companies had pension plans for the retirees, and that was in addition to your Social Security, that's how you retire. You had Social Security, but you also had this pension. So now we don't really have pensions, but we have 401ks or 403bs that you have with the institution here, and that's where that other income comes from, and then again, earnings from assets and other things make up your earnings. The average monthly benefit for Social Security in 2013, so I'm sorry this is a year dated or so, about $1,200. So the average worker today is drawing about $1,200 monthly on Social Security. Not a great income, but that's what it is. Now, roughly 70% of all Social Security recipients receive reduced benefits. What are we talking about with reduced benefits? Anybody know? Reduced benefits are when you take your benefits early. Okay, reduced benefits, and we'll cover this as we go forward, but at age 62, all of us, become eligible to draw your Social Security. If you draw it at age 62, however, it's a reduced benefit, and that reduction is permanent. Now, how many of you remember receiving a statement from Social Security on your birthday? Okay? I used to hate getting that. Just a reminder of how much older we're getting. Oh gosh, there's another birthday. Well, they stopped doing that. It was part of the waste reduction in our government, but in their infinite wisdom, they've decided to go back to doing that again. A lot of people complained about that. They weren't getting the information. The assumption was that everybody can go on the internet and get the information, but the reality is everybody doesn't have access to the internet, right? So they are going back to reissuing those statements. You'll get them on what we would call landmark events when you hit 60, when you hit 65, or when you hit 70, or when you hit 50 or 55. But most people don't remember getting those, and only 33% of people that take their Social Security ever get any advice on what they should do with it. And we think that's not good, because there's a lot of information they don't have. Oops, excuse me. Hang on. Okay. Value of Social Security obviously is a predetermined steady income. That's one of the biggest benefits of Social Security. It's something you can count on. Once you start getting it, it won't stop. And it won't ever go down, okay? Unless we run out of money. That's a whole different issue. But theoretically, it won't ever decrease. And in fact, There are annual increases. If you look at the red bucket, there are actual inflation increases that are built into Social Security we'll talk about. It's income you can't outlive. Again, it won't ever stop. And we'll talk about survivor and spousal benefits because those are critically important. If you ever stop to think about how much money you would eventually draw from Social Security, it actually can be a very substantial amount of money. I know we complain and we get frustrated with paying taxes and how much money we put into the system, but the reality is you can pull out a great deal of money, depending on how long you live. So the average retiree that would draw maybe a $2,000 benefit in 10 years, mathematically, of course, that's easy to figure, that's $2,000. Then you start factoring in the inflation increases, and a retiree that draws for over 20 years is drawing probably more than $600,000 in benefit. And then for the retiree that is fortunate enough to live 30 years, can draw well over $1 million. So it's a substantial amount of money. About 6 months or so ago, I heard a story about a woman that lived to be 114. She was still alive. I don't know if she's still living now. It was big on the talk shows. 114 years old. 114. Do you think she was still drawing her Social Security? Is she still eligible? And the answer is yes. There's no time limit on Social Security. So let's think about that. Let's say she retired at 65. How many years has she been drawing Social Security? Way longer than she probably worked. And that's out there for us as well. So it is a very valuable thing for us. So again, you start at $2,000 a month if you are in that range. You're about 10 years, your monthly, because of inflation adjustments, your payments would likely increase to an average of $2,600 a month. After 20 years, with the inflation increases, $3,400 a month. And then eventually, after 30 years, if you make it that long, $4,500 a month. And that's an average cost of inflation increase of 2.8%. That's been the historic average. And I think that's about right when you look at historical inflation rates. There can be spikes in inflation and such, but 2.8% is about right. Let's talk about your eligibility. So you're all eligible for Social Security if you have worked a minimum of 10 years and had Social Security tax withheld from your paycheck. They do it in credits, and when you look at the Social Security website, it's 40 credits. Well, a credit is basically a quarter. There are 4 quarters in a year times 10, so you got to work 40. You get 40 credits to become eligible for Social Security. So once you've done that, you are eligible regardless of how long you work, what your age is. Your age, of course, will determine when you can draw, but as long as you've got the 10 years in, you are eligible. Of course, we know the answer to this question. Where does the funding from Social Security come from? You paid it, okay? You paid it, and your employer matches a portion of that on every paycheck. Now, 6.2% is the average percentage that is contributed and taken out for Social Security. It was reduced for a period of time to 4.2%. That's no longer the case. This is something a lot of people don't know. Taxes are paid on a base wage up to $113,000. That number has been adjusted. I'm not sure if I actually have that. It's over 114 now. So think about that. So I don't know. I'm sure most of you make more than $114,000 a year. So you notice a pay increase after you hit that 114. So after about 6 months, you're on your way to your 200,000 earnings, right? Most of you. So you see your Social Security reduces because you've already paid the max. That is one of the situations with Social Security where people say, well, how do we fix Social Security? What do we do about it? Well, I can assure you, as we speak, legislatures, our congressmen, our senators in Washington, these conversations happen all the time. That is a topic of conversation because right now, after you hit $113,000 in wages, you stop paying Social Security tax. I can bet you that's going to change because as average wages increase, and there are a lot of people that earn that kind of money, but they stop paying taxes. That's going to change. 85% or 80, I'm sorry, question? Oh, okay. 85 cents out of every dollar that is paid into Social Security goes to pay current retirees' benefit. And this is a statistic a lot of people don't know. 15 cents of every dollar goes to pay disability. So there's a lot of folks on disability. In fact, I have seen it in my practice working with members. There's a surprising number of people on disability. After the age of 50, you become eligible for disability benefits with Social Security. There's a lot of folks out there not working, not contributing to the Social Security funds and drawing disability, and we're paying for that. The formula, and this is important. So the formula to calculate what your benefit is, people want to know, how do they figure out what to pay me? It's based on your 35 years of earnings, your highest 35 years of earnings. So let's take the average person. I don't know about you guys. I started working, I think I was 15, where I actually drew a paycheck and had taxes withheld. Part-time, of course. But so by the time, 15, so for 35 years, that puts me up to age 50. Well, of course, I'm going to work longer than that. But the highest 35 years of earnings will be what is used to help calculate your benefit. Then they adjust it or index it for inflation. That's a complex calculation. It is then again divided by 12 to get an average monthly earnings. And then there is a more complex three-part formula that the Social Security uses to determine. But simply put, it's the 35 highest years of earnings that you have. And we'll talk about this a little bit more, but it's important that you kind of have a sense of what your earnings history is. And this becomes important when we start talking to folks at age, well, do you take your benefit at age 62 or age 65? Do you stop working? And what's the impact of stopping working between 62 and 66 maybe, and having 4 or 5 years of zero earnings? How does that impact your calculation? It can. It can have an impact on what your future benefit is. If you didn't know, this is your eligibility. So pick your birth date. Depending on the year that you were born, that determines when your benefits begin. It's consistent with age 62. All workers that are eligible for Social Security at age 62 can begin drawing reduced benefits. However, for full benefits, it's based on your age. So everybody born in here after 1960, we will, I'll fortunately barely put myself in that category, will retire full benefits at 67. Those of you born a little bit earlier, look at your age. So that will determine, that's what determines when you're eligible for full benefits. So the second part of the question, well, a second factor, what people talk about in terms of, well, how do we save Social Security? What might change? First thing we talked about was I think they will raise the earnings cap, and higher wage earners will begin to pay more tax on that money. Second thing that will likely happen is this will likely change. So how many of you have kids? How many of you have grandkids? Chances are your grandkids will not receive Social Security benefits before probably, I'm guessing, if it was me, it's going to be age 70 or 72. I think that's what's going to end up happening, that the Social Security, the government will have to take those numbers and adjust them. And it's not just a punitive measure, but it is just simple mathematics and simple fact of life is, look, we're living longer. Average age today, average life expectancy is terrifically longer than it was in 1935. Anybody want to guess what the average life expectancy was for a man in 1935? About 63 and a half to 64. So Social Security, they get together in some dark room up there in Washington, they put this plan together and say, let's start paying full benefits at 65. Average guy's going to die at 64. We'll pay him full benefits at 65. Now, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but think about that. Do you think that they thought, this sounds really good, people are going to love this, right? Your Social Security. Take care of in your retirement. But the expectation that the lawmakers had at that time, it's not going to have, we're not going to pay it very long because they're not going to live that long. Now what's happening? It's the average life expectancy for a man today. Better than 78. Female? Better than 80. combined, happy couple, married, 84.6, something like that. Point is, what was not planned, what the founders of this program did not have any way of understanding or knowing that, boy, the conditions were going to change. So we have to be reasonable and understand that there are going to be changes in the program, because when it was created, things were different. Now, we live a lot longer, so we have to plan for that. So again, back to the start date, when you are full retirement, we'll just pick the year 66 because that's kind of the average. You get your full benefits, but if you take it early, you get a reduction, and that reduction is approximately 25%. So whatever your benefit is, you can figure about 25% will be reduced if you start early. So there's the formula. Taking an average, let's assume that at full retirement, you would get $2,320. If you start at 62, your benefit's actually $1,740. The thing that you have to be very fully aware about that is that's permanent. Once you make that choice, that's it. We'll talk about a few options about keeping yourself flexible, but if you choose to retire at 62 and you choose to take your benefit, it's stuck. It will get the inflation increases, but you will never get to this level. So we have a lot of conversation about, well, when should I take my Social Security? Should I take it early? Should I wait? And we'll talk a little bit more about that, but that is the fact. Do you have a question? Yeah.
It may not be relevant.
Sorry.
What if you don't get the 35 highest earned years before you want to take Social Security?
Well, they're still going to use that same formula. So I think the question is, what if you only have 20 years of work? Right. Then everything else gets filled in with a 0.
Okay, so they divide that by 35.
And how many of you are actually professors in here? And so you know math, right? So if you throw some zeros in there to your, it reduces it drastically. So the zeros kill you. So we'll talk a little bit in a bit about looking at your earnings history, make sure it's correct, because the zeros are very impactful. If I don't show up to your class and I get a 0 on exam, that's a problem when I go to get my average grade. So it's the top 35 years, and that's the formula they use, so everything else is filled in with a 0. So if you delay the onset, so we'll talk about the opposite. So what if, all right, so we're living longer, we're working here, and we love it here, and we want to keep teaching, or we want to keep working, whatever we're doing here till we're 70, which is not outrageous at all, or 72 or 75. Healthy, feeling good, loving what we do. You may delay your Social Security benefits, and there's a benefit to that. So the longer you wait to take it, the more money you will get. So if you get to age 66 and you're still working and you don't need it and don't want to take it right now, you can wait. You can wait all the way until you're 70. Now you can wait till you're 75, but you shouldn't because they don't, after 70 you get no increased benefit. So at the age 70 would be the max age you would wait to draw your Social Security, and every year you wait, your benefit increases 8%. Mathematically, what does that look like? So we were, again, 2320, what we could have drawn at 66. If we wait till 70, we could draw 3,000. Now let me talk a bit about why that could be critically important. How many of you are married or have a domestic partner? Okay. You have a partner and you're legally married, and they can assume there is a death benefit on Social Security, right? Or if you didn't know, there is. We'll cover that. So the death benefit is when a partner dies, the other partner can assume the benefits of their spouse if they were higher. So I'm in a partnership. I earn, my Social Security is $1,500. My partner's is $2,000. If my partner dies, I can switch to the spousal benefit, the death benefit of my spouse, because I'm legally married, and that is required. And I can go from the $1,500 to the $2,000. So this comes into play a lot when we have partnerships where there's a good age difference between the two. Yes, sir.
Does that have any effect if you take Social Security at 62?
It does. It's reduced. If you've started reduced benefits, it scales down, yes. But you still, even if you started at age 62, if your benefit is higher than your partner's, your partner can assume your benefit, okay?
But they won't get exactly what you would.
Right. No. If they're younger, it can be reduced, right? So, but let me give this example. If I'm 70, well, listen, I'm 66, and this is a real life example. My spouse is actually 9 years younger than I am. So I'll retire. I won't actually retire at 66, but if I did, if I took my benefit at 66 and my benefit's $3,000, okay, and hers is $1,500, clearly mine is much larger than hers. And I decide at age 66, you know what? I'm 9 years older than her. She's going to live a lot longer than me. I don't really need my Social Security right now. Why don't I wait? I can wait because I don't need it. And if I wait, what happens to my benefit? It goes up 8% a year. So instead of taking it at 66, I do what's called a file and suspend. Meaning I go to Social Security and say, look, I'm filing for my Social Security, but I suspend my payment. What does that do? That makes my spouse, my partner, eligible to file for spousal benefits, but I don't take any of my payments. And since I'm not actually taking my payment, my future payments are increasing. I'm 9 years older than her. I'm not kidding myself. I'm going to die first, right? And plus, I'm the guy. She's a woman. She's going to live longer than me. So what I know is going to happen is eventually when I die, she's going to take over my payment. Now, another misconception about Social Security is when a spouse dies, the spouse doesn't take and keep their own benefit and draw the other spouses. They have to choose one or the other. Well, of course, we're going to choose the larger, but that's a loss of income. Right? So if she's drawing $1,500, I'm drawing $2,000, that's $3,500. But if I die, she's only drawing $1,500, she can switch to mine, it's only $2,000, there's a loss of income. So what I've done is I've allowed my benefit to grow to a much larger level so that on my death, she can switch from her $1,500 benefit to my $3,062. So it comes in really handy in cases where there is some age difference in the spouses and when there are great differences in levels of earnings. So for those of you that have partners or spouses, when, and this is very common in traditional domestic relationships where you've got, the husband's got a higher wage than the wife and maybe she's stayed home with the kids for years and so her earnings are lower. So when she draws Social Security, it's substantially less than mine because I've been out working doing it. So the spousal benefit is very important. We'll get into what that actually is. We recommend strongly that you review your earnings records. Now, I mentioned the statement that you get from Social Security, right? That used to have, and it does have, when you get it, it has your earnings history on it. Anybody seen one of those? Anybody gone online and looked at theirs? Okay, good. Here's your website. If you want to make a note, it's in a lot of the papers. You can go to, obviously, www.ssa.gov. That is the official Social Security website. It is secure. You can enter your information there. You can set up an online access. That's the way they kind of were driving this. Again, they'll go back to issuing statements. But what you can see there, when you register, you can go in there anytime you want, no cost, no obligation, and see your statement. And it will show you your estimated benefit at age 62, your estimated benefit at 66 or whatever your full retirement age is, and estimated benefit if you wait till 70. So it's very useful information. The other thing that it will show you that's very important is it shows your earnings history, which if you're like me, I couldn't remember what I made when I was 18 years old. I looked at it and I thought, well, that's really pitiful, but it's kind of interesting to go back. I made $2,000 in 1982. So you can actually go back. Now, why that's important is this is not a foolproof system. Not to, again, to be critical of the government, but it is human entry. There are errors that occur, particularly going back for those of us that have been working for 35, 40 years. Did you have a smartphone back in 1980? Did you have a home computer? A lot of stuff was manual, and companies had to enter this information manually and submit it to the government. So some of your earnings, I've actually had presentations like this where I've had several people say, yeah, I went and looked at my earnings history and it was wrong. And then they actually have a link on the website that if you have a dispute, they'll tell you how to handle that. Go back and get some research done. And why that's important is we were talking about the zeros. You may look at that thing that says 1995, I have got zero earnings. You're like, I was working here in 1995. I know I made $40,000 a year. But somehow a zero got placed in there. So you want to make sure that is correct. So go and look at your earnings history on that. Very important. All right, spousal benefits, real quick. Spousal benefits basically state if you have been married, and we'll get into some of the rules about this. If you're married 10 years longer, etc., we'll cover that. But you're eligible for 50% of your spouse or partner's benefit, again in a legal marriage. So if I'm earning $2,000, if that's me, my spouse could draw $1,000 off the spousal benefit. That's important to know because if she, in my case, if she goes and looks at her benefit and realizes, well, her personal benefit off her earnings record is only $800, but I'm earning $2,000, instead of drawing her benefit, she's going to want to draw the spousal benefit. It's $200 more a month. There's nothing wrong with that. A lot of people make this mistake. They miss this. So instead of drawing the $800, she should draw the $1,000. Likewise, I could, if my spouse, let's say my spouse is older than me, and she files for Social Security, I could actually draw her spousal benefit, which is $400 of her $800, which might come into play if she's older than I am and I'm still working. The trick to this, or the key to this, is the higher wage earner, whomever we're drawing from, must be of full retirement age. So I've got to be, and we'll use the age 66, I've got to be at least 66 for my spouse or partner to draw off of me. Once I hit 66, as long as I file for my benefit, my spouse is eligible to draw 50% of mine. And again, where that becomes useful is when his or her benefit is less than half of what they could draw from me, then you want to use the spousal benefit. Let me pause there. We get a lot of questions about this. Any questions on that? Spousal benefit is important. The other thing that's important about this that you need to know, there is a thing called restricted application. Has anybody heard of this? You can file a restricted application. So a spouse can go and file, my wife can go and file for her benefit, but file a restricted application. This might happen if, let's say I was 60 and she was a full retirement age, but her benefit was her full benefit's less than half of mine. But I'm not old enough to file. She could file a restricted application and draw her benefit, her $800, at her full retirement age, and draw that for however many years. Once I hit, if she filed a restricted application, once I hit full retirement and I'm eligible for my $2,000, she then can switch from her benefit to the spousal. Very important to know. So what we have to do there, and this is again why it's important to sit down and talk to somebody before you go to Social Security. The folks at Social Security, they're very nice, most of them. They're very helpful. But it's not their job to make sure you get the maximum benefit. That's not their role. Their role is just tell me what you want to do. How do you want to do this? You might get a really good person there that would advise you about some of these things, but if you don't know anything about a restricted application or a file and suspend, they may not let you know about that. That's why this is important. So again, the spouse receives the higher of his or her own benefit. The primary worker, again, has to be, in order to get the spousal benefit, whomever you're filing on must be of full retirement age. So you can't be 62. So if I file early at 62, my spouse can't get anything until I'm 66 or whatever my appropriate age is. So it has to be full retirement age. Now, divorced. I'm sure that doesn't affect anybody in here, but I'm sure it does. So divorced spouses, we get questioned, well, what happens if I've been divorced? Can I file on my ex-spouse, etc.? And the answer is yes. If you have been married previously and you are divorced, and you were married for at least 10 years, you or your ex-spouse can file one against the other, right? Again, the marriage must have lasted 10 years. The person receiving divorced spousal benefits must remain unmarried. So my personal situation, I was married before, longer than 10 years, but my ex-wife got remarried. She's no longer eligible to draw off my Social Security. Then we also get the question, well, what does that do to my benefit? Well, it doesn't matter. It doesn't affect me at all, okay? But she's not eligible to draw off me because she got remarried. But if you have an ex-spouse and you were married 10 years and she or he is not remarried, they can draw off of your benefit. So the same spouse, what can happen is, and this is to get into what's wrong with the Social Security system, this is really interesting. You can have this situation can occur quite easily. You've got a worker that's retired drawing the $2,000, right? And that worker, I'll say it's me, I'm 66, I've retired, I'm drawing $2,000, I've been remarried. My spouse, her benefit was only $800, so she draws off me $1,000. So she's drawing that. My ex-wife that didn't get remarried goes and files against me. She draws $1,000. So we got $3,000 being drawn off one person's employment history. And it actually can extend. There's really no limit to this. How many of you know people that have been married more than twice? And maybe marriage lasted 10 years 3 times. It happens. So there could be a third spouse out there drawing benefit off of one worker. Now, again, anytime any one of those gets married, the benefit goes away. So if you have been married before and your ex-spouse has a higher Social Security benefit than you, it could be very beneficial, and it could have been 20 years ago, but if you were married 10 years, you want to investigate and understand what the impact of that is, and would that benefit be better than what you're going to draw off of your own record. And it's perfectly legal, and it does not impact that ex-spouse. That ex-spouse's, my benefits are not going to be affected whatsoever if I've got a wife and an ex-wife and maybe a second ex-wife drawing off of me. It's not going to reduce my benefit, but that's their benefit. Does that make sense? So at death, the survivor can switch, and we talked about that. The survivor can switch to the higher benefit. So again, if you're drawing $1,000 and your partner is drawing $2,000, and your partner passes, you want to switch over. Again, it's not both, but you definitely want to switch to the higher benefit. The survivor must be at least age 60, so in cases where there's a big difference in age, that's a factor. 50 if disabled, if there's a disability situation. This is interesting to note. You have to have been married at least 9 months before you can draw a survivor benefit, unless there's an accident. Now, an accident does not include pushing your spouse over a cliff. That's not an accident. But if a tragic event occurs, they'll give you some leeway on that. But you have to be married at least 9 months. And again, ex-spouse, 10 years. Claiming your benefit doesn't mean you have to retire, right? So a lot of folks intend to claim their benefit and continue working. There is an earnings test that applies to your Social Security, so your Social Security benefits can be impacted if you're working. How many of you want to work after you start drawing Social Security? Anybody plan on working after you draw? So if you do, just understand your benefits can be impacted, but the benefit impact on this is not permanent. A great misunderstanding about this, but let me go through it real quick. If you are early retired, 62 to 66, for every $2 that you earn, they will withhold $1 of your Social Security benefit over an earnings cap. That says $15,120. The actual number in 2014 is $15,470, I think. It's indexed for inflation each year. So basically, simply put, if you earn over $15,500, for every $2 over that, your benefit would be reduced $1. So if I earn $10,000 over that, that would be $5,000. So you would get a half reduction on your Social Security. Now, it's not permanent. If you look at the last statement here, at full retirement age, your future benefit will be increased to make that back. So a lot of people don't understand. You're not forfeiting that money, but they're basically holding it back from you because you've got high earnings during retirement or while you're drawing Social Security. You'll get it back. This is different than taxes on Social Security, which we'll cover. And then when you reach full retirement, there's no limitation. At full retirement, you can, at 66, you can make $100,000 a year. It's not going to impact your Social Security whatsoever. But there are tax implications. Quick mention of pensions. If you have a pension from a non-corporate entity, if anybody here ever worked for the government, if you had a corporate, like a government pension, and you did not contribute to Social Security for a number of years, you could get a penalty on your Social Security, but that affects very few people. All right, here's the taxes, real quick. If you earn money while in Social Security, you're drawing Social Security and you're also earning additional income, when do you get taxed? If you are single, head of household, 50% of your Social Security could become taxable if you earn over $25,000. Okay? Now, that number, this statement is very important. What it says there, combined income. So the formula for combined income is adjusted gross income plus any non-taxable interest plus half of your Social Security. So simply stated, if you're earning more than $25,000 or $30,000 in retirement, you should sit down with a tax professional and understand what the potential impact is to your Social Security. You could be exposing your Social Security to tax. Now, it doesn't mean they're going to take half of your Social Security, but it simply means that half of what you earn could be added to your adjusted gross income, and then you'll be taxed at whatever your income rate is. Where this becomes useful in terms of planning would be for those that want to work part-time in retirement, and maybe the income's not that consequential, and you maybe can control how many hours you work or what your income earning is so you don't exceed those levels to expose yourself to that tax. Now, if you're working because you have to and you have to earn that money, you just need to be aware it's going to be a potential tax impact. And again, the numbers for the married are down here as well. Any questions about taxes on that? That gets complicated, but what I would advise you there is when you get into the situation, and if you are going to continue working, be aware of it and consult with a tax professional to make sure you know what your liability is. Some people get surprised with this. Cost of living increases very quickly. Hey, time check real quick, I'm sorry. Tim, okay, good. So as I mentioned before, Social Security, you don't ever get a raise, but you do get cost of living adjustments. So you lock into what you lock into, and that's it. But if you look at the chart, you've actually had some nice increases over the years. This is based on the cost of living computations the government comes up with. There were some really big years. You may remember a good friend of mine, Jimmy Carter, in the 70s, president, inflation was crazy. We saw some wacky interest rates. So you had some big increases there. 2014 came in, just to update that, 2014 came in the same as 2013. So Social Security benefit recipients last year got a 1.7% increase in their benefit. Hardly consequential, but tiny, it's a little increase. So, but the average, when you average all that out, it's about 2.8% a year. So your benefit will go up very gradually. Can be zero, but it will never be negative. That's part of the code. They will never take anything away. Even if we had deflation, they won't reduce your payment. The longer you work, obviously, and this talks about minimizing those zeros, we definitely want to, So the question then comes, well, what's the best time for me to take my Social Security benefits? Should I take it at 62? I gave you that stat earlier. 70% of people take it early. So what will you need to do? What's in your best interest? And truly, the only way anybody can answer that is when you can tell when you can tell me or anybody else when you are going to die and how long you're going to live. That's when we could tell you exactly when the best time to take your benefit. That's the only way to know. So as we advise our members and clients, say, look, let's look at your situation. Let's look at how we can get the maximum benefit. There are planners out there that harp on, gosh, you gotta wait. You gotta wait the longest you can. But then, if you wait till 70 and you die at 71, how'd that work out? If you retire at 62 and you need the money, you need to probably take it. But that's where the value of sitting down with a planner and kind of looking at your lifestyle, look at your situation, and let's evaluate that. There are mathematical computations we can do. I can tell you where the crossover points are. Meaning, if I start drawing at 62, I get a reduced benefit, but I got 4 years of income, right? That's a lot of money in my pocket. So depending on how long I live, it's going to determine where did I come out better. If I lived to 90, I would have been better waiting. So the crossover points vary, but basically in the 78 to 80, 82 range is where waiting pays off, right? So delaying your benefits and waiting, and if you live past 80, 81, 82, your accumulated number of dollars received from Social Security will be greater. But more personal to you, and what's really more important and what we counsel our members on is, what's your life situation? What do you need? If you want to retire early and you need the money at 62, let's figure out a way to take it at 62. Other factors, health. What's your health like, right? Obviously, none of us know when that time will come. But we have some idea of what factors impact that, don't we? What is your family situation? How long did your parents live? Are you healthy? Is your lifestyle such that suggests you have good longevity? And if you feel those factors are important and in place, waiting is probably a good idea. The other more important factors we touched on earlier, I'll reiterate, in a partner situation, what's best for the partner? That could be a very important factor, because if my partner's Social Security is quite low and mine is pretty good, that's where we begin to look and evaluate those questions about, should I wait to take my benefit till I'm 70, or should I take it early? So that's family, health status, family medical history, lifestyle. Very quick mention about let me fast forward a bit here. Solvency of Social Security. I know we're not that concerned about that. Here we go. Solvency of Social Security. The Social Security system currently is solvent until 2033. So no worries until 2033. So I don't anticipate we're going to see significant changes in the tax codes between now and then, although there should be movement fairly soon to address what will be a problem, because in 2033, we're only at the current levels. We will only be able to meet 75% of the obligations. So there will be some movement on Social Security between now and 2033. But for most of us in the room, that seems like an eternity. But I think for our kids and our grandkids, that will be a problem that has to be addressed. But the other thing that's happened that's kind of ironic, the system begins to resolve itself because of aging. And the fact is, what's happened is with all the baby boomers, we've had this big group of people move through the retirement system. And as we move through that retirement age and we pass, it will kind of resolve itself. But the other challenge we're having right now is we have the highest level of non-working folks in the country right now that we've ever had. That's a challenge. So that's what our legislatures will have to figure out. But for those of us in the room, I don't think we have to worry about it. So I'm going to stop there and take questions. Any questions? Social Security is a fascinating critter. Should be fine for all of us. The most important recommendation I can make to you is when you get close to retiring, sit down and talk to somebody that's knowledgeable about Social Security, because there are some options, there are some things you want to consider. Again, Social Security, you can make an appointment with the Social Security office, and that is recommended that you do that within 6 months prior to filing. You want to sit down and talk to them, but I would recommend you sit down with a professional investment person or tax person, someone knowledgeable about Social Security, before you go talk to them, so that you know what your options are. And with that, if there aren't any questions, I'll turn it over to you, Bethany. Thanks, guys.